There is a specific kind of place in a flooded cave that experienced divers call a restriction, a point where the passage pinches down so tight that you have to take your tanks off your back, push them ahead of you, and thread your body through a gap barely wider than your rib cage, in the dark, underwater, with no way to turn around. Most divers, when they reach a restriction like that, feel something primal in their gut, tell them to stop. The smart ones listen. One diver didn't. He looked at a tunnel that narrowed into blackness, decided he could make it through, and pushed in. The bubbles from his regulator drifted back out of the gap for a while, and then they stopped. He squeezed into the tunnel, and he never came back out. This is the story of what happens at the exact edge of what a human body can fit through, and why that edge has killed some of the most capable divers who ever lived. Let me explain what a restriction actually is, because it's the single most dangerous feature in cave diving, and most people have never even heard the word. As water carves a cave over hundreds of thousands of years, it doesn't carve evenly. It leaves the passage wide in some places and brutally tight in others. A restriction is one of those tight spots, sometimes a low, flat gap you have to slither under, sometimes a vertical slot you have to turn sideways to fit, sometimes a hole so small that the only way through is to remove the very life support equipment on your back and feed it through ahead of you, following your own air supply into a hole you cannot see the end of. Divers have names for the worst of them. They speak about specific restrictions the way mountaineers speak about specific deadly ridges, with respect and with fear. The danger of a restriction is layered, and every layer can kill you on its own. The first is the obvious one. You can simply get stuck. Wedge a tank, snag a hose, jam a shoulder at the wrong angle, and a body that slid in smoothly can lock solid, unable to go forward, unable to back out. The second is silt. A diver squeezing through a tight passage drags against the floor, the walls, the ceiling, and every contact throws fine sediment into the water. In a wide passage, that silt disperses. In a restriction, it fills the entire space instantly, blinding you completely at the exact moment you most need to see where your gear is and where the gap leads. The third is the worst: panic. The moment a diver in a restriction feels stuck and blind, the animal brain takes over. The breathing rate triples, the body thrashes, and thrashing in a restriction wedges you tighter, throws more silt, and burns the air you cannot afford to lose. The restriction doesn't have to be fatal on its own. It just has to scare you badly enough that you kill yourself trying to escape it. The diver in this story was not a beginner. He had logged serious cave dives. He understood restrictions in theory, had been through them before, knew the technique of removing his tanks and pushing through. And that, in a way, is what makes these stories so chilling, because it's almost never the clueless amateur who dies in a restriction. It's the capable, confident diver who has been through tight spots before and survived, and who therefore trusts that they can survive this one too. Confidence built on past success is its own kind of trap. The cave doesn't care how many restrictions you've cleared. Each one is its own coin flip, and the odds reset every single time. He reached the restriction deep inside the system, far past the point where a quick exit was possible. We can reconstruct the shape of what happened from the grim evidence such recoveries always leave behind, and from the physics that govern every diver who has ever pushed into a gap too small. He committed to the squeeze. He pushed his body into the tight passage, threading through the narrow throat of rock, and somewhere in there, the cave caught him. Maybe a tank snagged. Maybe the passage pinched tighter than it looked and his chest jammed against the rock. Maybe his fins kicked up a wall of silt that erased the gap behind him and the gap ahead at the same moment, leaving him blind and disoriented in a space he could not see. Here is the part that I need you to really feel, because it's the difference between an inconvenience and a death. In open water, getting tangled or briefly stuck is an annoyance. You stop, you assess, you free yourself, you move on. In a restriction, deep in a cave, blind with silt, with no room to turn around and no surface to ascend to, getting stuck is a countdown. The diver has only the air on his back, and every breath he takes, especially the fast, frightened breaths that come with being trapped, drains that supply toward zero. He has to free himself, in the dark, by feel, while staying calm enough not to make it worse, before the air runs out. There is no help coming in time. There is no one who can reach him in those minutes. It is just him, the rock, the silt, and a finite number of breaths. And the breaths from his regulator that had been drifting back out of the gap, the only sign to anyone outside that he was still alive in there, slowed, and then stopped. I want to talk about why the bubble stopping is the most haunting detail of all, because it tells the whole story without a single word. When a diver is breathing, the exhaled air rises and escapes, a steady stream of bubbles that says, "Still here, still alive, still trying." When those bubbles stop, it means one of two things, and neither is survivable. Either the air is gone, or the diver is. For anyone waiting outside a restriction, watching the gap for their partner to emerge, the moment the bubbles stop is the moment hope dies. They know. They can't reach him. The restriction that trapped him will trap them too if they try to follow. They can only float there, in the dark, watching a gap in the rock that has gone still, knowing that on the other side of those few feet of stone, someone they came in with is no longer coming out. The recovery of a diver lost in a restriction is one of the most dangerous operations in the sport, because it means sending another human being into the exact trap that just killed the first one. It requires the most skilled cave divers in the world, working with extraordinary care, often having to deal with the rock itself, sometimes unable to complete the recovery at all, because some restrictions are simply too deadly to risk a second life retrieving the first. There are divers, to this day, whose bodies remain inside the caves that took them, sealed in restrictions that no one can safely enter, because the math of risking the living to recover the dead doesn't add up. So what's the lesson buried in this one? It's a hard one, and it's about the most dangerous word in any high-risk pursuit, probably. He probably could have made it through. He had probably been through tighter. He could probably free himself if he got stuck. The restriction killed him in the gap between probably and certainly. The best cave divers in the world live by a brutal discipline about restrictions, and it comes down to a single rule. If you have any doubt that you can get back out, you do not go in. Not probably, certainly. The restriction will always be there for another day, with better gear, more practice, a clearer head. But you only get to be wrong about a restriction once. The ones who survive long careers in cave diving are not the ones who push through every tight spot. They're the ones who turned around at the ones they weren't sure about, who let their fear of the squeeze be louder than their pride. There's a saying in the cave diving community, born from too many stories exactly like this one. There are old cave divers, and there are bold cave divers, but there are no old, bold cave divers. The ones who push every limit don't get to grow old. The ones who grow old are the ones who learn to turn back. He squeezed into a tunnel he wasn't certain he could exit, and the cave did the rest. It didn't trap him out of malice. It simply was what it had always been, a gap too small, in the dark, with no forgiveness in it. He brought the only thing that could kill him in there with him, the belief that he'd be fine. Let me show you just how fine the margins are in a restriction, because the technique itself tells you everything about the danger. To pass through the tightest gaps, divers use a method called no-mount or side-mount diving, where the tanks come off the back entirely and are pushed ahead or trailed behind, so the diver's profile is as flat and small as a human body can be made. They exhale fully to collapse the chest. They angle their head, their shoulders, their hips, reading the rock by feel, oozing through gaps that look, to anyone watching, completely impassable. It is a slow, deliberate, almost surgical process, and it only works when the diver is perfectly calm, perfectly controlled, and perfectly honest with themselves about what they can fit through. The instant any of that breaks down, the technique that gets you through becomes the technique that gets you stuck. A snagged hose, a tank pushed at the wrong angle, a single panicked movement, and the careful surgery becomes a struggle, and the struggle wedges you tighter. There are specific restrictions in the cave diving world that have earned dark reputations, gaps that divers speak about by name with genuine fear, because they have killed skilled people who thought they could make it, and the pattern in those deaths is almost always the same. Not a beginner blundering in, but an experienced diver who had passed similar restrictions before and trusted that experience one time too many. That's the cruel psychology of the restriction. Every tight gap you successfully pass builds confidence, and confidence is exactly the thing that talks you into the gap that kills you. The voice in your head says, "You've done tighter than this, you'll be fine, just a little further." And "just a little further" is the most dangerous phrase in the entire sport. It's the sound of the point of no return approaching, dressed up as reassurance. What makes restrictions so uniquely lethal compared to other cave dangers is that they remove your options all at once. In open water, a problem leaves you choices: ascend, signal, swim clear. In a restriction, the moment you're stuck, nearly every option vanishes simultaneously. You can't turn around. You can't ascend. You often can't even reach your own equipment to fix a problem because your arms are pinned by the very rock holding you. You're reduced to the most basic possible response. Free yourself by feel, stay calm, don't make it worse, and hope you have the air and the composure to work the problem before the air runs out. There's no room for error because there's literally no room. The restriction strips a diver down to nothing but their own discipline, and if that discipline cracks, there's nothing left to catch them. I want to ask you something, and I want an honest answer in the comments. If you were deep in a cave and reached a gap so tight you had to take off the equipment keeping you alive and push it ahead of you into the dark, would you go in? Or would you be the diver who turns around? Most people say they'd turn back. The graveyards of cave diving are full of people who thought the same thing right up until the moment they pushed in. If this story got to you, hit like. It helps more than you know. And subscribe before you go, because next time I'm taking you to Nutty Putty Cave, to the single most agonizing entrapment story I know. A man trapped head first and upside down for 28 hours, so close to rescue, and so impossibly far.